Alright, welcome to the complete guide of piston bolts. In this video I'm going to show you what they are, how to build them, what they're good for, how fast they go, some different variations, and some different ways to wire them. So, let's get started. So now exactly what is a piston bolt? Well, a piston bolt is exactly this, invented by UltimateRedstone, released quite a few years ago, I'm not sure the exact dates. Link on the video description where he shows you how to build them and what exactly they are, but quite a bit has changed. So very simply, when you put the minecart on the rail, you click the button and it goes. Obviously you can hop inside, get transported along at 20 meters per second. Diagonally, they go 28 meters per second, and that makes these a very, very good system for going long distances at great speeds with relative ease, relative low lag, and they're quite tricky to build, but definitely worth it. So these are extremely stable, seeing as in multiplayer, it actually keeps track of the minecart on the server side, whereas on your side, the client side, your player might be, somewhere else and might not be able to keep track of it if you're playing on a laggy server, but the server will not lose the minecart, so they're actually extremely reliable even on laggy situations. I used to play on SciCraft, where they had a German server and I'm an American, so my ping was usually pretty high, never a problem. Now, I'm going to show you how to build these things real quick. So, simply put, once you've figured out where you want to be, and I'll show you how to determine that in just a second, you basically want to just find the exact position you want to go in and face the rail towards where you want to go and then into where a piston can push it. The piston will be placed here. And then just continue this pattern just like so. UltimateRedstone shows a much better example in his own video, but this is kind of the gist. For going the other way, it's a little bit tricky, so let me show you some examples here. Facing west and north, you can see this by hitting F3 and looking up here. You can see northwest and all the different cardinal directions. South and east, if you're going in that direction, it's considerably easier. You can place the rails just how I've done there. However, if you're going south or north or west, the rails are placed a little bit differently. You see, if you try this exact same trick, it doesn't work. So what you got to do is you have to actually provide some kind of power source. A lever, redstone blocks, redstone torch works pretty well. I mean, if you want to be crazy and use something like a button, well, then you can go ahead and do that. But I like to use redstone blocks as long as I'm in creative. And you can place the rails, oops, just like so. And then remember to remove these rails first, because if you don't remove the rails and you break yeah, it does something like that. If you remove the power source and then the rails, you could mess things up. So you want to just be careful. And then it should look something similar to this, and it's the exact same effect as before. However, placing them diagonal is considerably easier. You can just turn them like that, and then just continue that pattern for quite a while. It's pretty stable, hard to mess them up, but do know that if ever you make a chain really, really long and you break one in the middle, it is extremely annoying. I would say it's hard to fix, but really it's impossible. You will end up having to break every single rail in a row and then destroy all the pistons, and then you'll have to start over. One thing I almost forgot here is if you want to place the pistons, always make sure it's facing towards where the rail kind of sneaks out. The minecart will be leaning towards that edge, so the piston face will go here. And then you can just alternate them just like so, and the wiring is pretty much just like this. I put it on the outside because I learned by placing these on top of bedrock. I'll be showing an example in just a second. But it does make a lot of sense to put the wiring just underneath if you have the space, because it's it's much more compact and just as fast. Now the example I was talking about is exactly on here. I am in an old backup of the first Minerva season. If you're not aware of what Minerva is, Minerva SMP is a technical server created by me. It's a fairly large server, about 70 members as of recording this video, and we do large technical builds. In fact, if I can go a little off script just for a second, you can see that we have a wither farm right down here. And this is actually a good example of something I'll be talking about later, where we actually used a piston bolt for kind of a niche situation. I'll get into that later. Now the example I want to show is this. This is the first piston bolt I ever made, and it actually had to have a junction, which is a little bit tricky, and I'll be showing a lot more in depth on this and how to make these in the future, because this is actually what inspired this video. A lot of people kept asking me how I was able to turn a piston bolt from straight to diagonal, and then from diagonal to straight, and I'll be covering that in today's video. However, I just wanted to show an example because an important detail of piston bolts that I've never seen covered in another video is right here. It's the loading and unloading station. So when you're breaking down a piston bolt, powering it one block at a time is really important. You also want to know that piston bolts don't provide any velocity. You're pushing the minecart onto a rail. It has no speed. So, in this situation, I have the rail being pushed onto a powered rail, which in this case, the piston actually extends to push the minecart and then retracts to push it on here. I can't demonstrate this because that junction broke in 1.8. More details on that later. But in this situation, it pushes the minecart off, and then it would get pushed again. Unfortunately, this doesn't work, so let me just place it manually. The activator rail would kick you off, and then the minecart would just kind of go up into a hopper that goes into a dispenser. Breaking it on a cactus is a really nice way to get it back, and the way I have it set up here is when you trigger the minecart, it actually powers off a torch, and then replaces the minecart behind you. So, let's talk a little bit more about this on the other end. So you can just follow the piston bolt, get to the other side, and in this case, it basically just pushes the minecart along. This will get pushed onto here, and then this piston immediately kicks you off and puts the minecart back into a similar system as before. So this covers two things I said I'd mention. Our starting point was over there by our storage room, and our end point was supposed to be our guardian farm, but we also had our mushroom farm, so we just split the difference here. And that's kind of just what you want to do. You always want to be going as diagonal as possible because it is the faster version, but in this case we had to go in a straight way just so we can get that diagonal all lined up. So there isn't really any set tutorial on how to make these stations. Effectively what you want is something that kicks the player off like an activator rail, and then just some kind of transportation to move it along. This has been different every single time I've ever built one of these, so you're just going to have to kind of eyeball it yourself. But if you need any help with this, just ask me in the comments below or hit me up on Discord. I'm easy to find. But yeah, so let's just take this piston bolt one last time and kind of show what the problem is. You see, when you're going from diagonal to a straightaway, you actually end up getting pushed into a piston, and I accidentally broke some rails. However, this does not work anymore, and let's get a little into that right now. Alright, so let's get into junctions. Let's start with the 90-degree turn. This is exactly what I just showed in the wither farm. Sometimes when blazes would get mad, they could go up and attack our gas, and we didn't want that to happen. So every once in a while when it happened, it was just easiest to take a piston bolt out over 128 blocks, despawn all the blazes, and then take a 90-degree junction and go straight back. So simply what's happening, and this is kind of what I was showing before by powering these pistons one at a time. I show this because someday you might have to power these pistons on your own, and I'm not going to be able to be there to show you. So if you need to custom design one of these, just kind of think about exactly what needs to happen. So in this case, what needs to happen is this piston fires, it drops the minecart onto a block without any rail on it, and it just kind of sits there for a tenth of a second before this piston pushes it onto the rail, and then effectively what you've got here is a whole secondary piston bolt. This is completely separate from the first one, and we just have some wiring in between to link it up. Now the amount of delay for this piston to fire, and then this piston to fire is 3 ticks. So then this piston fires, and then 1 tick later this piston fires, 1 tick later this piston fires, and then what you've effectively got here is a whole nother piston bolt. Down here I've just got another 4-tick repeater to make up for the 4 ticks up here, and then just 1 tick later, that happens, and then that happens, and it's just a whole new piston bolt. So let's watch that back at full speed. Place the minecart, trigger it, and it goes right to the end. Now, one thing I want to show is that for this kind of wiring, it is much more messy than it needs to be. What you can do is, by using the redstone I showed earlier, just have all the repeaters going underneath the pistons, power it just like so with the 3 ticks I mentioned earlier, but now you only need the 1 tick delay to get to this piston, you don't need any 4 ticks, and then it just continues like normal. So you can see I've completely cut off this outer circuit, and it triggers just fine. Now, 90-degree turns are a very niche wiring. You very rarely need to build these, so I'm not going to cover too much more into that. Just know that you should always be going diagonal if you can, only if this is absolutely necessary should you need what I've just showed you. Now, diagonal pistons. I'm going to merge this a little bit with a diagonal tutorial, just because I think it's pretty fitting. Diagonal pistons are just a touch different, so what you want to do is actually power 2 pistons at a time, so you're actually powering 2 pistons here and 2 pistons here. So in total you're actually powering 4 pistons every tick. So what you can see is if I disable the rest of the wiring, take away this block here, and then power this minecart once, you can see it actually goes 2 blocks with each redstone tick. So this is the wiring that I like to use because, like I said, I'm used to on top of bedrock, and this is where it's nice and flat out. However, if you have the ability to go down, you can do the wiring just like this. This is much more compact, and this is what we'll be using in our survival world. It's much smaller, and it does exactly the same thing. Let me just demonstrate. There you go. And it uses a lot less wiring because, well, for the input at least, because it's just one repeater, where this one just needs a little bit of dust to get going. So to turn it diagonally, I originally took an approach as I did on the 90-degree turn, where you're just powering the piston one block at a time, and I figured I should just drop it off on a block, connect it via another piston, and then as I've just explained earlier, that's a completely separate piston bolt with a diagonal, and then the minecart just continues like so, and it just looks just like that. And really, this is on 2 ticks just to make up for the extra piston over here, and then this starts just like normal. However, with a little bit of testing, I found that you can actually push the minecart straight from a straight going piston bolt onto a diagonal piston bolt. So this goes seamlessly from going straight onto a diagonal, and then you just have to wire it up like so. Just make sure you're powering these pistons and these pistons at the exact same time. And then with this simple wiring, you're powering these pistons and these pistons. It's pretty simple to do this. Just make sure that you're powering 2 pistons spaced 1 block apart. I suppose you can put blocks in like this. That should work completely fine. But for the sake of the tutorial, I would just like to show you the bare minimum. And then having repeaters and dots of dust going in a diagonal is the easiest way to keep track of this. And then blocks behind it is a really nice way to connect the repeaters to the dust. So let me actually fill in all these blocks and power it. So in this case it actually didn't work, and I'm going to explain a little bit why that is. You see, in this case we're actually powering 3 pistons at a time. You can only really power 2 pistons at a time. So this powered a little bit differently. It did something a little extra at the end there. So what I'm going to be showing is how to go diagonal back to straight again, and this is where it gets complicated. As you saw in 1.8, I was able to do something a little bit tricky. Let me just set up an example over here so I can demonstrate exactly what I'm talking about. So right here I've got an example where you can actually push the minecart forward from within the piston, and in 1.8 this worked a little bit differently. Let me show you what I mean. So the problem we have here is this should work just like a normal piston bolt, right? Well, in 1.8 it did. However, in 1.11 it actually only works at half speed. You see, it can only power it once or twice or whatever. What's actually happening here is the minecart just isn't being calculated like it was before. What you end up needing to do is you have to first mess up all of your rails and then fix it while you're talking, extending the length of the clip so that you can go back and make all of the repeaters 2 ticks, and then you'll see that this should work completely fine. Yeah, I say it works fine, but it did in my testing. And then you'll see that it actually works completely fine if you change this first repeater to a 1 tick delay, but now it's going at only 10 meters per second. So what I had to do to make this go to a 20 meters per second design is a little bit of tricky wiring. So what we've got going on here is going to be a little complicated to follow. You might have to watch this back a couple times, but bear with me. So we're transitioning from a diagonal piston bolt onto half of a diagonal piston bolt, which pushes it onto a singular piston bolt, and then very fast this piston pushes it forward, pulls it back, pushes it forward again, forgetting its block, and then it continues just like a normal piston bolt. Now you might have noticed we had to actually use this piston twice, which is what makes this so complicated. What was breaking in the new design is because it has to go so slow, that's obviously a half speed problem. I need this to go 20 meters per second, not 10. What's happening here is you need this second piston. It makes it very tricky to continue. This rail is facing to the left because I can't put a piston here, and we had to do some trickery. So this actually went through quite a lot of different revisions. I hope somebody can find a better version of this, but I was able to replicate this over here going the opposite direction, and I'll be showing a tutorial on this over there. Now to break this down, what's happening in order is this is the end of the diagonal piston bolt. 1 tick later this piston fires. Okay, so it fires, this minecart is on this rail. And then just after that, you can see I've got this on a 3-tick delay because this piston needs to fire, and then, well, the reason this is on a 3-tick is because it can power from this monostable. Monostable shoots up. Let me just get my green wool block back. And then this powers and then unpowers. And this needs to be 3 ticks or else the observer won't power twice. So obviously I'm using observer because it's a dual edge monostable, which means uh, it powers fast enough for this piston to forget its block, and then, or it powers a quick 1 redstone tick pulse, and then it unpowers with a redstone tick pulse, giving us a really nice way to move this minecart along. So let's kind of see that in action. When I power this, you can see what happens. It just pulls this block back and then pushes it forward, which is a really clever technique I found out because you actually need this piston to end up in this exact spot so that we can reuse it later. What happens here is we steal this 3-tick repeater, and then on an inverter, we just kind of turn this off and then turn it on to power this piston. And on the other side, this is where things get a little bit more easy to understand. So this 2-tick repeater is just so that everything gets synced up, and then this triggers just like a normal piston bolt. And then on the other side, we just have 6 redstone ticks of delay, just so that, you see over here we have all this complicated redstone, and then over here we just have a long delay, so that both of the sides end up completely synced up at the end. And let's just show this working full speed while we're riding it. Let me just hit F5. Oh, I messed something up. Alright, I changed something on accident. One of the repeaters was on a tick too long delay. There you go, and it works completely fine. So yeah, that repeater there is actually supposed to be on 1 tick, and I had it on 2 ticks on accident. So, there we go. Now, let's show you how to build that and exactly what's happening. So here we have a completely bare-bone design. What I'm going to start with is the wiring for the monostable. So, to continue this, just like normal, you have to have a block on the outside, repeater going into these 2 pistons. That'll just finish up our diagonal. However, we have to already back up just a little bit. This right here is where we need to put in our piston. Let me just get a different block so that we can, actually let's use red wool, just so we can see exactly where that piston is. Let me grab a different wiring, let's use pink wool. And then this is where we need to steal our outputs. Let's just have a 3-tick repeater. And then this is the sticky piston that we need to use. Remember, every other piston in this system is a normal piston except for this single sticky piston. Well, that and the monostable piston. So really 2 sticky pistons. And then we need to have a piston here that needs to get retracted and pulled back. And it's a good a time as any to place our rails. Now, because in this case I'm going in the north direction, I'm going to need to have some kind of power source. I'm going to put the redstone blocks just in the ground so I don't forget and I don't have to remove them. For you, obviously, you can go ahead and just place the power source off to the side. Just be sure that, once again, all of your rails on the outside are completely removed before you change your power source. So it should look just something like that. Let me just continue these pistons all the way to the end. Remember, the piston needs to be facing inside of the part of the block where this rail is facing as well. I never know what to call that, where the rail is like flat. Sure, let's go with that. And then place the blocks next to the pistons. I think we're already prepared to do that. Let me just get these repeaters in place because they're going to need to be there later. Not up here, down here. And then 3 ticks on each of these repeaters just to spread it out evenly. And then a pink wool just to complete the circuit. So, now this is where the logic comes in a little bit. We're going to need a block here to connect that observer to the repeater, and then we need to place a torch right on the outside of this with another observer facing in, and then just a repeater on 1 tick. And that's it. You have successfully conjoined a diagonal piston bolt to a straight piston bolt. Let's see it in action. Alright, I see the problem. Once again, it didn't work because I had this repeater on 4 ticks, not 3. Now, let's see it in action. There we go. Worked completely fine. You know, in every tutorial, it's actually pretty good if somebody makes a mistake, or if the tutorial maker makes a mistake, just so you can see kind of what the problem is. Even I make mistakes, so if ever you have an issue, this does work completely fine. I've tried it in a bunch of different areas. If you build it block for block, every repeater is exactly the same, then contact me and I'm sure we can work this out in the comments of this video or on Discord. But yeah, let's show some last little wrap-up points. So, These are just some alternate designs. These are smaller, and this is one thing I've seen before. A lot of people, want to put solid blocks on their piston bolts. It's actually pretty nice if you want to put these like completely solid blocks. That way you can hide the pistons and then just kind of make some kind of pattern like this. If you want to make it really seamless so that you only see the rails, that's totally up to you and would work completely fine. And then of course you can spawn proof this by putting slabs or by using just glass or something. It's totally up to you. Remember, just be careful when you're building this. Make sure you got your directions all laid out. Make sure that if you're building it in the west to the north that you use power supplies so you don't, mess it up. If you break the rail in the middle, I'm sorry, you're going to have to start over, but yeah. I hope this answered all the questions on how to turn piston bolts, how to make piston bolts, what they're good for, and a few examples from our own survival worlds on what these things are really, really good for. If you want to see some more of these in the future, you should check out my channel. I will be uploading some videos in the very near future where we'll be showing off a system in the Nether that uses these quite a bit with some really interesting logic to make piston bolts go pretty much wherever we want all over our world. If you're watching this in the way future, I might have already made those videos. Just check out my Minervalog Season 2 on my channel. That's where I upload all the videos I make on our server Minerva. But yeah, that should be it for this video. Hope I answered all your questions. Ask away in the comments below if I missed anything. Hit me up on Discord if you need anything else. And that should be it. Hope you enjoyed, and thanks for watching.